Hello, InfoFire is a fireside chat series brought to you by Information Matters. We bring you experts from the academia and the industry who will share their views on a chosen topic. InfoFire is informal and a structured conversation between our guest and the host. I am Shalini R, your host for this series. I began my academic career sometime in the mid 1970s. People and technology always interested me. Fascinated by the cognitive as well as the computing aspects of information, I started to specialize in digital libraries in the mid 1990s. I joined the ETD, Electronic Thesis and Dissertation movement, by initiating a project called Vidyanidhi Digital Library in the year 2000. I joined the iSchool movement by establishing ISIM, the International School of Information Management, the first iSchool in India. In today's episode of InfoFire, I will be in conversation with Professor Gio Wiederhold of Stanford University on the topic of artificial intelligence. Hello, welcome to the next episode of InfoFire, the fireside chat series from Information Matters. Our guest today is Dr. Gio Wiederhold, Professor Emeritus of Computer Science, Electrical Engineering, and Medicine at Stanford University. The topic of our conversation today is different flavors of AI. Hi, Gio. Welcome to InfoFire.
Welcome.
So, today we are going to be talking about the different flavors of AI. Gio, you studied aeronautical engineering and worked on computational problems of aeronautical engineering at NATO as well as in IBM before transitioning to database systems and academia at University of California, Berkeley, and then Stanford. You are truly a legend. While working at Stanford, way back in the 1970s, you integrated knowledge-based systems or technology exploiting artificial intelligence concepts to provide intelligent access to database systems. In that, and you called it as KBMS. In that sense, I would call you a person who engendered the AI, the field of AI, and you have also, since then, since the days of the expert system, witnessed the evolution of the field of AI. Do you agree with me if I say that the overarching mission of AI is to mimic the human cognition?
Let me go back to one sentence in the introduction. The reason I started being interested in AI with databases because it provided a much more solid background than other experiments in AI that try to deal with a complex real world when image recognition, etc., were essentially practically non-existent. So databases provided a better model, a cleaned up model versus other work. And that was my motivation for KBMS. In fact, I coined the word knowledge-based systems in a proposal to ARPA for combining databases and AI. Now, to go on with the question about human cognition, there I don't quite agree with using the phrase mimicking. The current researchers in AI want computing and the machines that they use to achieve capabilities that we expect that humans can do, but they don't use a model that is based on the human brain. The human brain is a very different engine. It's an analog engine, very complex, it gets modified continuously. If we modify software too much, we create bugs, right? And the human brain is actually very slow. Many of the interactions in the human brain take fractions of milliseconds. And in computer, we now talk about nanoseconds. So mimicking is not the word. We may want to get the same effect, but not use at all the same methodology.
Okay. So you are trying to achieve the, I would say, the outcome of a human brain at a faster rate, but not exactly mimicking. Is that what you are saying, or countering my expression of mimicking the human brain?
Exactly.
Okay. So that's why it's still called the artificial intelligence, right? Because you are trying to do what intelligence or human intelligence does in an artificial manner or through machines.
Right, in a very different way. And that means it is also very different by the application. So where much trustworthy data is available, we have come quite far. For instance, in spelling correction and automatic driving, because here we can get a lot of information. But as soon as a setting changes, where we have less experience, the results become quite less predictable, right? Spelling correction may not work well for an author writing a religious tract because less has been collected there probably by the artificial intelligence experts, right?
Okay.
Because it's problematic. Much of that was funded by DARPA, and
Yes.
DARPA is not interested in collecting religious text, right? If you place a car in the middle of Mumbai or Calcutta, it may encounter situations that are outside of the experience that it gathers from driving here in San Francisco. And the systems, luckily, would be designed that the car would simply stop and give up, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I've driven through India, and the reactions are very different that you have. In fact, you learn to ignore pedestrians and act as if you don't see them, because otherwise you could never proceed, right? Here, if you see a pedestrian in California, you're obliged to stop and stay away, 30 or 40 feet from them, so you don't scare them. So it's a different setting. So the technology that is based on in AI, that is based on information from one setting, does not translate automatically into other settings.
But then, you have, good that you mentioned DARPA, because you worked as a program manager at DARPA. In fact, you were responsible for initiating the DARPA's Intelligent Integration of Information program, which led to the digital library initiatives and funding by the National Science Foundation, which at least we, the digital library community, like to think as spin-off of that is Google. And Google itself has Google AI project where they're conducting cutting-edge research in advancing the state of the art of AI. But as you said, despite all these advancements in natural language processing, deep learning, and machine learning, what have you, intelligent assistants, as a commoner, I would say, still a far cry. They are not smart enough, according to me. What do you say? They are still very far from being really intelligent.
Right. So we have reached some point, where we certainly can replace much routine labor done by humans. To a certain extent, machines have always done it, but were limited in their actions by the need for still some human decision making. The simple human decision making can be replaced. And of course, that also has many social implications. We replace, delivery drivers we may not yet be able to replace the people that design the algorithms that optimize delivery. Right?
Okay. So it is where do you see, at what stage of advancement do you see artificial intelligence? How far have we come, and where are we? Is it the tipping point today? What do you think?
Well, as I mentioned, kind of many relatively mundane tasks can be replaced.
Okay.
But we have to be careful of failures. You see, I'm still worried about automatic driving because even if it works well 99% of the time, if it doesn't work even a fraction of 1% of the time, and the results can be fatal, that would be unacceptable. There are other tasks, let's say loading a ship or a car, where errors would not be fatal, and being able to do it correctly 99.9% of the time is quite acceptable.
Okay.
So we have to be careful about what is the cost of failure, even if the failure rate is very low, and whether we can ever get to a situation where the failure rate is zero. That is a question that I don't want to answer, because the numbers become smaller and smaller. And of course, even in healthcare, we're willing to undergo procedures that have a good chance of helping us, but always a minimal chance also of, hurting us and being fatal. Yeah. So these trade-offs, are very difficult, and they will depend on how widely AI will be exploited.
Okay. Good that you mentioned one of the, pressing, debated issue of self-driving cars, because one of the, I would say, advancements, that is the deep nets or the deep neural networks, that has been, in fact, ruling the AI field because of one particular algorithm, that is back propagation, right? So which enables the system or the deep nets to learn from data so that they can classify images, they can help in the self-driving cars, right? So what, according to you, how do we harness or augment this, the power of DNN or the deep neural networks?
Well, the problem is, in the end, if you want to apply it in the system, having a satisfactory AI neural net system is only a small part, right? Because you mentioned already, what is fed into the AI system are images that have to be classified and labeled, and then there's to be an interface to the decision-making system. There's many other things. Then it has to be interfaced to the motors and the technologies and the driving part. When these are all different systems, which are very well integrated in a human being, we don't notice that we have an interface between the brain and our hand, right? There's no specification. In the systems, you have interface specifications, and are those interface specifications adequate to convey everything that is needed for correct observation? And if not everything is transmitted and understood by another aspect of the technological system, another component that makes up a self-driving car, then it is easy to miss it. Mm-hmm. And a little bit of that problem has to do with labeling. When you have different technologies and different specializations, like image understanding and decision making and motor control, those people don't often speak completely the same language. Mm-hmm. The scope of a term they use can maybe 90% overlap with what another speaker means, But if it does, but the remaining 10% can lead to problems and misunderstandings. Yeah.
So some of the studies have indicated that the deep neural networks, the DNN, can be augmented, harnessed better with some of the structured logic rules, which makes it easy. Do you foresee such a convergence between the different flavors of AI?
I think such a convergence is nearly essential, but today I have only seen a few single instances
Mhm.
where it happened. There was recently an article in Science about a very nice integration. I'd have to look it up what it was. Going back after I started with the KBMS project, the subsequent project I worked on was mediation, and that was in order to be able to use data from databases that were collected by different people with different objectives and different labeling, and not to integrate all the data, but to be able to integrate results that were extracted from database A, B, and C into a meaningful objective by software that would understand the interfaces between these databases. But by that time, we had a fair number of examples where people were using results from multiple databases in combination, often having a lot of errors and problems in the process because the scope did not matter. An example that I've used in my writings is, right at Stanford, where we had a personnel database and a faculty database. Well, looked obvious that they should be able to be integrated, but it turns out not the same people were included. Because as a faculty member, my kid can get tuition support. My kid was included in the faculty database, but of course it wouldn't be in the personnel database.
Mhm.
And similar, there would be people in personnel that were not part of faculty. So you could not just merge those two databases together. The labels were different. The authority to make modifications in those databases was disjoint. And in fact, people would never agree to work together because they had their own objectives and they wouldn't want their own objectives to be wrecked by working with others who would have different objectives. I see the same thing happening in AI. And so we now have examples where things are combined very successfully at times, like in automatic driving, but we don't yet have an underlying theory of integrating these various components. And of course, we don't have yet enough examples
Mhm.
to validate such a theory. I could come up with, no, not me, but somebody smarter than me and more occurrent than I am could come up with a theory that would involve integration,
Okay.
but then it would have to be tested, on sufficient existing examples where it's generalizable. So I think that is a step in the future. And until that is achieved, a certain amount of generalization, making the benefits of the various technologies available, won't be achieved. I don't know when that will happen.
Mhm.
You know, a dozen years isn't very long time in that regard.
So, what, according to you, are the newer algorithms? Do you consider, for example, convolutional neural networks, CNN, or recurrent natural networks, RNN, etc., are some of the possible opportunities? Are they offer opportunities?
Well, in the meantime, all the separate fields will improve. Okay, but that does not automatically lead to improvement of the aggregated whole. It
Okay.
will lead to instances where the combinations exist, but to have a general understanding of how fundamental concepts like logic, neural nets, database technology, I can think of some other technologies at the moment, you know, rule-based systems.
Rule-based system.
Would be integrated isn't very clear. And of course, to understand it, rule-based systems are very easy to understand because we understand the rules. We can understand them. We don't understand very well what a neural net does. So here, some integration would be very useful to enhance our understanding. And once we have understanding of the joint, then we can make better improvements in the systems that use them jointly. But at the moment, those people don't talk enough to each other. There's some practitioners that use them in combination, but I don't yet see an adequate theory, even though that DARPA is funding work on AI understanding. And in fact, there's some requirements in Europe that decisions should be explainable. But that work is not yet at a level that I'm comfortable with.
See, what are like when we talk about AI, the simplest, I can say the commonest, my grouse with AI, it's the spam detection, for example, right? It's still, we are having 8 mails, spam detection algorithms, etc., since the last 30 and odd years. But even today, most of the, including the Gmail, etc., don't do the spam detection efficiently. Such simple text-based things are not being, I would say, handled well. So how can we trust AI with much more complex, systems? Right? That's my question.
And indeed, that is a problem because, of course, the spammers are very proficient in avoiding all the routine words, right? And understanding your social interactions, so you will react and accept their spam. And that shows how difficult it is to make systems truly reliable. And of course, there's all kinds of funny issues. I think you mentioned privacy protection, etc. Personally, I don't believe we can expect privacy once we have these systems.
Yes.
And maybe, not having privacy will cause us all to behave better, just like we lived in little villages, 50, 100 years back, where the neighbors, knew everything that we were doing, right? And so privacy.
So in a sense, the global village that we were talking about some 30, 40 years back, right? The digital global village now.
In the global villages, you have people helping each other, but you don't have privacy.
Privacy.
So you better behave.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. What, according to you, are the grand challenges of AI?
Well, I consider, dealing with the reliability and understandability. And you can't have the reliability improve if you don't understand what is going on, right? If it stays a mystery, then technologists can increase the reliability by another few percent all the time. But does it really help the public?
Yeah.
Just like spam protection is getting better, but it's still not adequate.
That's true. It's good that you brought about the issue of privacy, because today everyone is worried across the world, worried about the government surveillance, right? So what about the dangers of this kind of a government surveillance? on citizens. I know it's a more political issue, but still it is a issue or something that bothers each one of us. I always wonder whether whatever like my talking to you is being heard by my government.
Actually, surveillance doesn't bother me. I don't think I've done anything in my life that I would be embarrassed of my neighbor finding out, okay? Or the government finding out, okay? When governments start being repressive and identify actions that are reasonable as being against their best interest, that is when surveillance hurts. So this is why dissemination of information is being restricted in situations, where the government is doing things that are probably against the world's best interest. And we see that happening at the moment. And we only see one view of it. And of course, the view in the US would be different from the view you have in India, and would be different from the view you have in China, different from the view you have in Europe and in Russia.
Yeah, too. I mean, it's privacy is not just about being embarrassed by what we have done or what we say. It's also about, in a true democracy, you don't worry about your opinions, your thoughts, etc. But when governments slowly kind of move towards you can say authoritarianism, then there is a worry about this surveillance, right? I understand what. Yeah.
But if we all would have access to the same surveillance, we would be able to see what our government leaders are doing, right?
True, it works. Hopefully, it works.
And if you could understand the motivations of your government leaders, and the entire public would, right? So one-sided surveillance is dangerous, but global surveillance could actually help.
Yeah, I would agree with you. One side, we are worried about the government surveillance on its citizens rather than the completely open, transparent system. Yeah, you are right.
I would like the citizens to be able to have surveillance, of the government officials just as much.
True.
As as vice versa.
Yeah, to a certain extent, not exactly in the sense of surveillance. Perhaps I would say that the social media has brought that kind of a surveillance for citizens having surveillance of the governments, because today, everywhere there are, citizens are having cameras, so the government officials or the politicians' actions and utterances can be captured easily, and then, it cannot be hidden. So to that extent, maybe, you are right that new technologies are giving us two-way surveillance system, at least to a certain extent.
Well, I don't think, I would not like to call it two-way, because that implies there's one party that is good and another party that is bad. And I would talk about global surveillance, where everybody can watch everybody. You see, and you can watch the prime minister when he goes to a meeting and hear what he's saying and see his facial expressions as well, just as the prime minister can see you watching him.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a two-way part, it should be global and universal. Otherwise, you set parties off against each other.
One other, my next question or worry is people worried about the dangers of autonomous weapon system, AI in defense or warfare. What's your view on that?
I consider them extremely dangerous. Again, because you don't have enough training examples of how those weapons work in actual wartime, and you'd hope not to have enough experience. But, when you have a small number of examples where they truly a weapon hits an enemy tank, and you only have a few examples that are often repressed of them hitting a station wagon with civilians, then you shouldn't have automation, because the automation depends on the experience that you've gathered.
True.
Now, if you could smoothly integrate reliable rules to them, that might be better. But again, the rules are kind of at the moment hacked on, rather than using a more global,
True.
integration system.
True.
And so that makes them risky. Namely, now those rules are also able to misinterpretation, and the rules again depends on label what is good and what is bad, right? And who labels a tank as bad and a station wagon as good, automatically through image recognition, right? So the other technologies get involved, right? And they all have interfaces, and all those interfaces are not smooth and have risks. So indeed, the simple answer is it's extremely risky, and it may lead to the destruction of the world.
Well, true. Yeah, that's the word.
Somebody may press the wrong button, and the rules don't recognize that it's an exception.
That's true. So
I
we shouldn't
think,
even be thinking about, government shouldn't even be thinking along those lines, right? Deploying AI in warfare.
But of course, the government delegates things to the military for that, right? And the military pay much money for fancy systems, but those systems may not be integrated into the true human experience.
Well, let us not end our interview with a negative or a dystopian view of the automated or autonomous warfare. Some also believe, in fact, many also believe that AI is the kind of, some kind of a silver bullet that can magically solve many of the problems of our society, including, global warming, poverty, inequality, etc. What's your view on that?
Yeah. I don't quite believe in magic. For that, you have to go to Disneyland. But I think it can be integrated into systems that improve food production, that improve logistics, so that the food that is produced gets to the right people in time, without spoilage, that minimizes the effect of plastics being distributed everywhere, by using better packaging, etc. So there are a lot of tasks, that can improve human life and reduce risk, and in the end also reduce global warming.
Yeah.
So, and there actually we can have likely enough examples so we can train the systems reliably, with a high percentage. And again, we have situations, let's say in food supply, where having a 1% failure is not fatal, and the 99% benefit greatly overreaches the cost of the 1% failure.
So if you can end hunger in the world through AI, that would be really one of the huge accomplishments, right? So on that particular note, you see a much more, I would say, a more positive outcome out of the AI efforts in the future?
Well, I think AI will be integrated in all human disciplines, some faster, some slower, and it's true that early integrations were often in the military area, including, you know, efforts that supported my work, you know, but that doesn't mean they cannot be translated into reliable transport, growing of food, delivering healthcare. See, healthcare is still risky because the cost of failure in healthcare can be high. But for instance, the benefits of distributing pharmaceuticals effectively, you know, that has relatively low risk. So I think we should focus on applications where the risk of occasional failure is low, you know, like spelling correction, or well, occasionally my text messages get really messed up by some improvement that an AI system tries to do. But on the whole, it does improve my spelling, especially as I get older and my hands get more wiggly. I do more typos, and the system helped me, well, improve the spelling. And sometimes they really mess up, you know. But that is again a low risk of failure model. So I think we should focus on applying AI in systems where the cost of failure is modest, is acceptable, and at the moment avoid AI in systems where the cost of failure is disastrous.
Yeah, and that positive perhaps note that AI could do, if not wonders, but do better the societal problems or help solve the problems. I would like to thank you, Gio, for being part of this InfoFire Fireside series, and then giving me an opportunity to interact with you. Thank you so much, and we would like to, on behalf of InfoFire, on behalf of Information Matters, I would like to once again thank you and have a good day. Thank you.
And thank you still for the hospitality you accorded to me and my wife when we visited you in India.
It
And
was such a
my
pleasure.
Indian experiences are still a very valuable part of my life. I was able to go back again 4 years ago and visit many of the friends that themselves were getting too old to travel and visit me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye. Have a nice day.
Bye.